Om Shanti. Buenas tardes. Perdón, estábamos. Sorry, we were waiting, Sister Maria Paula, but she's still in Peru. Maybe she's having some problem to connect. So, as I am the translator, I will be giving the introduction in Spanish. Sorry. Hermanos, muy bienvenidos a la Yagya Viva. Estamos muy contentos de que el día de hoy esté la hermana Gayatri. Todos la conocemos muchísimo porque nos lee las Murlis por Avyakti Parivar, pero para los que no saben al respecto de ella, los que son más nuevos, la hermana Gayatri ha sido representante de Brahma Kumaris ante las Naciones Unidas desde 1980. Ella conoció Brahma Kumaris desde 1975 en Guyana, donde es su tierra natal. Ella trabajaba en ese momento en la universidad, en la oficina del decano de educación. Viajó en 1978 a los Estados Unidos y después de unos cuantos años, ella empezó a representar a Brahma Kumaris ante Naciones Unidas en Nueva York. Así es que, bueno, pues le damos la bienvenida y estamos muy deseosos de conocer cómo es que ella llegó a Baba. Very, very welcome, Sister Gayatri. We are very glad to have you here. And also Brother Ricardo from Brazil. So he will be doing the interview. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Om Shanti, good afternoon, good evening for some. Thank you for the invitation. It's my pleasure to be here tonight. For me, it's tonight actually, and be able to interview Sister Gayatri. I had the chance to initially meet Sister Gayatri in my beginning, Gyan. I remember there was an Images and Voice of Hope program in Rio, in Brazil, many years ago, and she and Sister Judy Rogers came to host, to facilitate that program. It was very nice, and had the chance to see classes in New York and Madhuban throughout the years. A very inspiring senior for all of us. So according to the general topic of this meeting on how our seniors came, what was their experience. So the first question I'll make for Sister Gayatri is, how did you come to Gyan? How did Baba find you?
Well, I was born in Guyana, which is geographically in South America, but culturally we are with the West Indies because of cricket in particular. And the country was ruled by the British, so we spoke English. And in 1975, Baba found me in Guyana, but he just didn't find me. He found the whole family. And as Baba says, you were sitting comfortably in your home, and I came to you. And I always feel he speaks to me when he says that, or he speaks to the whole family, my Lokik family, when he says that, because literally we were sitting very comfortably in our home. And one fine day, my mother got a call in 1975, December, and the call was from a Hindu priest. And the Hindu priest said to her, could you come and accompany me to the airport, because I'm going there to meet a sister. I've invited the sister to come because it was the United Nations International Year of Women. That was 1975. And I want her to come and to inspire the women in Guyana. But I need someone to go with me to the airport. So Sister Jayanti was arriving in a very early morning hour, around 4 o'clock. And so my mother and my mother's sister, my aunt, they accompanied this priest to the airport, and they picked Sister Jayanti up. And my mom said on the way back, why don't you stop at our home first, and before you take her wherever you were going to take her, because we were living in the central Georgetown. And so that happened. And Sister Jayanti came, the first home she came to when she landed in Guyana on the 5th of December, 1975, was at our home. And she landed there, she entered the home, and she was we have a winding staircase that goes up to the second floor. So she walked into the ground floor and she looked up, and there was my father standing there waiting for her to walk up the stairs. And she said, this is Sister Jayanti sharing, and I think she shared it on a number of occasions because this was an experience for her that was very impactful. She said that when she stood there, she remembered what Daddy Janki had told her. And Daddy Janki had told her a dream that Daddy Janki had. And that dream was that Sister Jayanti entered a home, and at the top of the home was the person of the home, and he was waiting there to greet her. And that was a child that Baba was waiting for. And so she said that whole dream came back to her. So Sister Jayanti connected immediately, I think, to my parents. And she came up. My mother offered her, at that time, she drank coffee. She doesn't drink it now. And made her feel at home, asked her if she wanted to fresh up. And then as she was drinking the coffee, we had a telephone call from my father's sister. And the call said that my cousin, who was 24 years old, just had a car accident and left the body. So Sister Jayanti heard that. And of course, my mom then went upstairs to the third level of our house to wake us up and to tell us this. But of course, it became a little bit of a anxious moment. And then the priest took Sister Jayanti away to where he was taking her in the first place, to the accommodations he had for her. And then a few days later, Sister Jayanti came back. She told the priest that she wants to go back to that same family. She wants to go back to that same house because on her arrival, we got the news that someone left the body and she wanted to come back and be of service. So then she came back and she basically stayed at our home and at the home of my mother's sister. She kind of shared it because they both had huge houses. And that was the beginning. That is how I came into Gyan. But she came back because she knew that we would be interested in, guess what? We would be interested to know what happened to the soul that left the body. And so it was a very easy entry for her to begin telling us or giving us the knowledge of the soul, because it became meaningful to us. We just had an experience in which my cousin left the body, And it became very meaningful to us, this whole thing about soul and soul consciousness. So we were very intrigued with what she had to say about the soul. But the other thing I think that for me was very impactful was because she was staying at our home, it was an immediate transformation of diet, of social life, which wasn't much because we lived a very closed life. But there was a lot of changes happening in the household. My mother started making these amazing changes, and my mom established a meditation room in the home.
Mm.
But then my brother said to her, my brother was 16, and he said to Sister Jayanti, well, you're talking a lot about God being incorporeal and God being a light, but then you're telling us God said all of this. And then, but how did he say it if he's a point of light? And that was when she brought the picture of Brahma Baba out and showed us Brahma Baba. And the moment I saw Brahma Baba, I loved him. And I always say that I loved him so much because I had unfinished business with him. And he came back to all of us, but I always say, especially me, so that we can finish that, whatever we got started. And so that's how I came into Gyan. I wasn't seeking, I wasn't running around anywhere for anything. I surely wasn't unhappy. I was very happy with where I was and what I was doing. I was, 23 years old when I came.
Very special. We'll definitely have some questions on service, on your experience at the United Nations and so on. But based on your first answer, could you share a little bit about your experience from that initial moment with your family and Sister Jayanti towards your first experience in Madhuban? What was the experience in Madhuban and the impact of that in your life?
Well, Sister Jayanti came in 1975 to Guyana, and then Daddy Gulzar came to Guyana in 1976, and she came around March, I think. It was around March. And when Daddy Gulzar came to Guyana, of course, we didn't know, at least I didn't know, that she was the chariot. I mean, I may have heard it, but it didn't register that she was the chariot that Baba came through. So Daddy Gulzar was very loving to all of us. We were a bunch of Kumaris and a few Kumars. And we would take her out sightseeing. We would do all sorts of things with her. We would sit around her feet, and she was young. So it was more like a friendship with her. And then she was the one who invited my parents to come to Mount Abu, to Madhuban. And then of course, after that, Sister Mohini was there. When Sister Jayanti left, Sister Mohini came. And so Sister Mohini accompanied us to Madhuban. Now, my father was on an official trip. At that time, he was in a high position in the government. So he was on an official trip to do something in Europe. And then, but he was going to go first to India and then return to Europe to do whatever he had to do on that trip for his government. And so we all went with him. He offered us, he says, anyone who wants to come, I will take you to Madhuban. So we went as a family. And the impact for me in being in Madhuban, of course, was tremendous as we continue to stay. But the first impact was we arrived very late at night. It was around 9 o'clock at night. At that time in 1976, August, it was only Panda Bhavan. There was nothing else. And in Panda Bhavan too, there was the history hall and the meditation hall and Indraprasth and a few other buildings, but it was still very small, no Om Shanti Bhavan. And so when we arrived in the auditorium, in the courtyard, and walking toward us were Didi Manmohini, Dadi Ji, Dadi Gulzar, and the senior brothers. And then there were the Madhuban Niwasis around. And we were there just standing, and there was a light, of course, a floodlight, and it was mostly dark. And they were showering Uncle, and so showering all of us with rose petals. And so that impact of being welcomed with the showering of rose petals in the courtyard created a very deep feeling of arriving at a place that was extremely special. But of course, I didn't know what was so special about it, but it gave me that feeling. And these seniors were all around us. But the second impact of being in Madhuban in 1976 was we were under the impression that you go to Madhuban and you say, we've come to meet Baba. You say to Baba, hey, Baba, I've come to meet you. But that was not the case with Baba, because Baba was not coming in August. And so because we knew Dadi Gulzar took us to Baba's room, which was very small. It's now extended, but at that time, it was where that front chair is. That was where the room ended. And so we all sat there with her, very cozy room. And she went into trance and she asked Baba, this family has come to meet you. Are you going to come to meet them? And Baba said, no, I'm not going to come to meet them. I didn't give dates, so I can't come to meet them. And so then she came back from her trance and she said to us, she was laughing. She said, Baba said, he won't come. And I remember being stunned. You're not going to come? I thought it. I didn't say anything. Well, if you want me to continue to have faith in you, then you better come, because if you don't come, then what will happen to my faith? My faith at that time was like, oh, don't let me lose his faith. But my sister was also there, and she said to Dadi Gulzar that, well, who has more love, the father for the children or the children for the father? And then Dadi Gulzar said, well, this is what Baba is saying. Now, that was a Tuesday night. Then the Wednesday night, my father had to leave because he was going to do this, whatever his government duty was. And so on Wednesday evening, he left. And of course, the daddies give him a lot of love. And he went off. And I remember looking at him leaving, and I said to myself, oh my, you came here to meet Baba and you're leaving without having met him. And I was feeling kind of, coming my attachment to my father, I suppose, I was feeling kind of not nice. But then he left, he had to go, and we were left with daddies, and we were having great fun. But then the Thursday morning, Dadi Gulzar offered bhog to Baba, and Dadi Gulzar brought back the message from Baba. In the history hall, she offered bhog. And Baba said, okay, tell them I'll come and meet them tonight.
Wow.
And he came and he met us, and it was just us as a family, and it was the Madhuban Niwasis. And I remember we were like sitting on the floor. Dadi Gulzar was sitting on the floor. Baba was in her body on the floor. So it was really close. And then, but we were kind of sitting back. And then Baba says, no, come close. And we all went close. And then he said, who brought me? The Kumaris brought me. And do you know what is the return for me coming to meet the Kumaris? And I remember saying, I don't care, Baba. What is the return? You came. And that was the most important thing. And so, yes, that was very, very impactful, because I remember looking at him and feeling oh, this is the same Baba I used to remember in Guyana. It's not a different Baba. It's the same Baba. It's the same feeling. It's the same presence. It's the same familiarity. It's the same deep, deep, deep recognition. So I think that was the moment he really won me over completely. It took a while to realize that, a couple of years, but I knew I committed in a way that only he would have made me commit. So I always
Wow.
say my impact in Madhuban was a commitment to Baba himself.
Wow, what an evidence of faith to make Baba comes before the season to meet all of you.
Yeah, that was
Very
special.
definitely there are other many details these trips and your experience in Guyana, but now coming to your experience in the United States, and as Sister Rosanna mentioned in the first introduction about your experience with the United Nations, that many of us are aware of, and we know that it started in the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, but if you could let us know how the UN opened its door for Baba service. How did it all started?
Well, I think it started with Mansa Seva. We did not come to New York as well. At least I wasn't here. But Dadi Kumarka, Dadi Prakashmani was here in New York, and Sister Mohini was with her. But there was no center or anything. Nothing was here in New York. They had visited, stayed with the family. And I think Dadi wanted to get a feel for the United States. So they took her along the First Avenue, UN Plaza, and Dadi was walking. And when she saw the building, she stopped and she asked, what is this building? So many flags are flying. And they said to her, this was the United Nations. And then they described to her what the United Nations was all about and what they did there. And with Sister Mohini, she stood there in front on the sidewalk in front of the building, and she gave drishti to the building. And she kind of, not just drishti, but through the drishti, it was the sakash. And maybe she just also connected to Baba. And then after that, she said to Sister Mohini, one day, Baba's flag will be hoisted here. Now, that was the seed of the United Nations. And then, of course, she left. And this is the specialty about souls like Dadiji. She would have this very powerful thought. In that moment, she would express what she felt in that moment. But then she handed it over to Baba and she walked away. She walked away from it. She didn't carry it. Well, how do we get it done? What are the next steps? You know, she didn't have a strategy that she wanted to see it happen. So she walked away. She went back to India. Sister Mohini went back, I think, to Guyana. And then in 1978, Sister Mohini came to New York. And then the center got established. And in 1978, I also came because Sister Mohini wanted someone to stay with her for a short while, and she invited me to do that. So I came to do that. And then I was going through, in 1979, at some point, I was going through some boxes that the sister who was here with me had done some filing in. And I found an application form that was half completed. And so I picked it up and I completed it. And in those days, you could walk into the UN. So I went to the UN building, I walked in, I took the form and I submitted it by hand. And lo and behold, about a month or so after I did that, we got a call from the UN saying that our organization was accepted. Now, this was what we used to call the DPI, the Department of Public Information. And I said, just like that? They said, yes. And then I said, could we come in to see you? So Sister Mui and I went in to see the woman who called. And when we went in, she said to us that the reason your organization was accepted, and remember, we were very small. We were barely a couple of years in the US, but of course we were bigger in India. She says it's because of two things. One, we're looking for organizations who are headquartered in developing countries, and at that time, India was a developing country. And we're also looking for organizations who are administered and run by women. We're looking for organizations that had the leadership of women. And so these two factors, well, the spiritual factor was Dadi Ji, but the other two factors that got us into the UN was being from India, and secondly, being run by women. And that was how we became affiliated to the UN. And as they say, the rest is history.
So nice, so interesting. And you mentioned that Mohini Didi wanted someone to stay for a couple of years there, then
No, 6 weeks. 6 weeks.
Six-
I came for 6 weeks and it hasn't finished. I'm still
almost 50 years later, you are still
almost 50 years, right? I'll be 50 years old as a Brahmin next year.
Very interesting. And now, also related to this service at the United Nations, I was surveying the Brahma Kumari's website, the BKUN website, and I found this quote that says, "At the core of the Brahma Kumari's work is the understanding of the connection among awareness, attitude, vision, action, and world." And we know this is something that BKs have brought many times to different United Nations conferences. So, if possible, could you talk a little bit about this trajectory, awareness, attitude, vision, action, and world? And on a personal level, how do you think that this understanding is important for a Brahmin in his effort maker life?
We chose that spiritual trajectory because ever since we came to the United Nations, we were called upon to identify our core expertise. And our core expertise for the UN means something within your teachings, the teachings that you are following, that would have universal impact, and so would be something that the UN would find useful in its work. So, you know, the United Nations is a body that stands for peace. It stands for human rights. It stands for reaffirming faith in the dignity and worth of the human person. So all of these will be called principles of the UN. So when we, after a few years with being at the UN, after we did Million Minutes of Peace, Global Cooperation for a Better World, Living Values, Educational Initiative, and other programs at the UN, we realized that what the UN was actually focusing on was something that we could be very useful to them with. So when they did the Millennium Development Goals, and when those goals then changed to the Sustainable Development Goals, at the foundation of the agenda, the Sustainable Development Agenda, were three things: universality, transformation, and leaving no one behind. And so we thought that this is very interesting because Baba's knowledge is universal, and that's what the UN wants to draw from us. What is this core expertise from your teachings that would have universal relevance to us? Secondly, they were talking about transformation, and Baba always tells us that he has come to transform us. He has come to transform the world. And thirdly, they have said we should leave no one behind. And Baba always says he's come for all the children in the tree. So we felt that this was something really that we should connect with very closely, but to focus on transformation. Now, this was where the spiritual trajectory came in, because as we were looking at our work at the UN within this core essence of transformation, we were seeing how we can talk about it in areas such as climate change, in areas such as social development, in areas such as peace and disarmament, and different areas, in the youth area, in the women area, in the International Days area. How can we stay and focus on this trajectory? And so we thought that what we would focus on is the transformation of consciousness. And the transformation of consciousness is an inner working. Before you hit the action and the world, there was something that we needed to look at if we were looking at transformation. And so this inner working of the spiritual trajectory was something that we opened up at the UN, saying that it is something that is neutral. It's a neutral trajectory. So awareness is neutral, attitude is neutral, vision is neutral, action is neutral, but it's what you bring into it that makes it descending or ascending in the direction that the trajectory will take you. And so that was how we introduced it. And so it is very connected to the transformation of consciousness in the inner workings of the self before we get to the point of taking an action. And normally the action is taken, but we never look back at this subtle trajectory to see how the direction of it impacted the action. And of course, it is then connected to the law of karma, that whatever action I do will have an equal and opposite reaction. So that was how we introduced it. And now we are staying with it, I think, for as long as we are there at the UN, because it is something that is bringing people more and more to look at solutions from the inside, to look that you cannot have solutions that will be sustainable if you just focus on the secular world and strategize the solutions according to the secular world. But there needs to be an inner transformation, and that transformation has to be a consciousness, and the consciousness has to connect to leaving no one behind, and it's a universal consciousness. So you will connect to these innate virtues that are universal, and to laws such as the law of karma that is universal. So that is how we present it at the UN. And for me, at a personal level, the trajectory has always been meaningful to me as an individual, because I feel that for every bit on that trajectory, starting with awareness and leading to the world, there's a code. There's a code that I'm called upon to honor this trajectory. So if I start with awareness, there is a code to that awareness. And the code to the awareness is what Baba talked about in a few Murlis ago. The code is your self-respect. The awareness is your self-respect. And that self-respect wasn't given to you by any human being or by anything limited. It was given to you by God. So your self-respect must be in the awareness, as a respect given to you by God. God respected you. And that's the code for the awareness. There's a code for attitude, and the code for attitude is benevolence. How do I have a benevolent attitude? Is by having pure feelings and good wishes. So if I don't have pure feelings and good wishes in my attitude, then I cannot bring benevolence. And then in perception, in my vision, it must be a soul conscious love through my vision, a vision of brotherhood. Because if I see individuals as bodies, then I'm not going to be able to serve them with love, to transcend the, all the things that the vices and the negativity that surrounds them. I wouldn't be able to do that if I don't see them as souls and get that soul conscious love in my relationship with them. So the code for my vision would be soul conscious love and brotherhood. And then there's a code, Baba talks about another code, you see, it's smriti, and then it's vritti, and then it's drishti, and then there's another one that's called Sanskriti. And Sanskriti is basically the culture. You're creating a culture. And so from vision, before you go to action, there is a culture that's being created. And Baba refers to it as the Brahmin culture. And that Brahmin culture is this whole thing of harmonizing sanskaras, the whole thing of including everyone, the whole thing of we are a family. So the code is for the culture is family. And then from that, if I see the world as a family, then the actions I will take will carry the code that they must be, every action I do must manifest a virtue. And so that will make my actions poetic actions. That will make my actions take me out of the bondage. That will make my actions actions that bring success and victory. But it needs, the code of it is to make it a virtuous action, an action that's connected to an innate virtue or an innate power. So I use that for my action. And then, of course, the world that we're creating is a world that's full of all the beautiful things that Baba tells us about. It may not be a golden aged world right now, but at least the world you're creating inside of you is a world that is taking you more and more into becoming a self-sovereign. So for me personally, without the trajectory and without understanding that each one carries a code that I must adhere to, is going to make me faster and into a better self-sovereign.
Well, that makes the trajectory very practical. Very nice. I still have one last question before we open up for the questions from our audience. Today we have almost 40 people connected, and the organizing team are recording it, and it will be displayed and shared to many BKs in Latin America and other places. But the last question I have to ask, let's change a little bit of gears and move to the service and the relationships within the Brahmin family right now. The topic of the double foreigners season in Madhuban between 2024 and beginning of 2025 is on the harmonization of sanskars. Based on your almost 50 years of experience in Gyan, of being involved in many kinds of service, different relationships, and so on, what would you say, based on your experience, are the main qualities or the main skills that may help a Brahmin to create harmony within the group, within the gathering?
I think there's one for me, just one, and that is humility. I think if you don't have humility, you cannot harmonize your sanskaras. Because the disharmony of sanskaras is based on ego. It's not based on anger. It's not based on lust. It's based on ego. And if you notice, the last 3 words that Baba left with us was incorporeal, egoless, and viceless. Why did ego get the middle of the 2? Ego is considered to be a vice. It should have been included in the viceless. But it has, Baba identified it as something that we had to look at and we had to see. So for me, the reason we are not able to harmonize sanskaras, it's because we have ego, and ego is so deep within the soul that we are not even able to identify it as the vice that is causing the disruption, the discord, the disharmony in my relationship with myself first, and then in my relationship with others. Because in any disharmony with someone else, it cannot exist if I don't have a deep disharmony within my own self. I project it on the other because I don't know what to do with it. And because I don't know what to do with it, I blame someone else for it. And so I feel that in this day and age, if you look at the world and if you look at what's going on, everything is now a play of ego. And the ego is playing out in so many different ways. It's unbelievable. So for me, whether it's the Brahmin world or whether it's the world out there, we have to look at the power of humility. And in understanding the power of humility, only then can we be that instrument that Baba is talking about. So these 3 words that he uses, nimit, being an instrument, nirman, humility, and then renewal. The renewal is not creating a golden aged world, but the nirman, which is renewal, is about creating the renewal within ourselves and to recreate this very powerful foundation of humility so that we could then harmonize within ourselves and then be able to harmonize with others. I'll stop there. If you want to continue, you can, but I don't want to go into examples of how destructive ego is to the disharmony in the family and how much sorrow it causes to others. It's almost a sorrow that the disharmony of sanskaras create that people cannot forget because it impacts them so deeply that they can't forgive, they can't forget, and they live in both the giver and the receiver of that sorrow based on this harmony of sanskaras. Both the individuals are tortured by it. And that is happening in the Brahmin family in some instances.
Well, and the last Sunday's morning brought many aspects to reflect upon that, on ego, humility, and the last 3 words of Baba. Yeah, very nice. And I saw that there is a first question that's related to that, but I'll invite Maria Paula. I think she'll manage the question and answer session now. Maria Paula, please.
Thank you, Ricardo, and Om Shanti Gayatri. So nice to see
you, Maria.
It's really nice to go on your memory lane. It's always nice. And so we have a question, and we invite everyone. If you have some questions or comments, you can put it in the chat box. But the last thing you were mentioning, could you elaborate more about the connection between humility and happiness, please?
They want to know the relationship between humility and happiness?
Yes.
Okay. Well, humility is connected. I cannot be humble if there isn't a sense of contentment in me, if there isn't a serenity within me based on some form of recognizing that I am who I am, and in knowing who I am, that's enough. When Baba tells me who I am, he is telling me who I am in the highest, with the highest vision. He is telling me who I am as a unique being. He's telling me who I am the way he is seeing me. Now, that should give me a great deal of happiness, because someone at last has recognized me for who I am and is telling me the truth about who I am. And I am exploring those truths Baba is telling me about myself, so that I can return to being my authentic self and my true self. Now, the knowledge that that is happening should give me a lot of happiness. The process or the journey that will take me back to being the authentic self should also give me a lot of happiness. Knowing that Baba is the canopy that is protecting me and keeping me safe as I do that exploration should keep me very happy. But the reason I lose that happiness, it's because I am still looking for others to appreciate me. I'm still looking for others to tell me things about myself that I can hear physically from a human being's voice, so that it reaffirms in me that I'm someone good. So that takes away the happiness. And Baba always says, do not listen to others. Today, they will say something nice to you. Tomorrow, they will balance it and say something not nice to you. And you will take the happiness and you will take the sorrow. And that will leave with you that stain of unhappiness. The other thing he says, I do not want you to compare yourself to another. Because the moment you compare yourself to someone else, you've lost your respect. And in losing that respect, Baba says, how are you going to reestablish yourself back into the respect that I'm giving to you? It will take you a long time. So for me, is if we stay with what Baba is saying, it will cultivate within me a deep sense of contentment. At long last, I've arrived and at a place where I can be seen, and I could be seen for who I am truly by Baba's eyes. That will give me a deep sense of contentment. And in that contentment, as I follow the journey, as I follow the footsteps, as I deepen the listening to what Baba is saying about me, the happiness will grow. I will flourish in that happiness. The moment I step out and look outside for some kind of happiness, I pursue something of the outside, whether it's human relationships or whether it is possessions I want. You know, this IT world is such a world that it pulls us into these different areas that we think will give us happiness, but it doesn't. Then I will lose that happiness. And so I feel that humility is something that comes from contentment, and humility tells me I'm content with my glass half full, because one day Baba will fill it drop by drop, and I shouldn't be discontented with my glass half empty, and I go out to human beings to fill it up for me, because that's when I lose my happiness. But it requires a deep sense of humility, a humility that makes me honor who I am without having to to, you know, bow to others to get it when Baba is giving it to me.
Wonderful, thank you. And almost finishing, we have one last question. And is that we make a lot of mistakes and sometimes that discourage us. So how we can deal with that discouragement?
Well, I would say the simple answer is don't make the mistake. Because if you're saying when you make the mistake, you become discouraged, then the simplest answer is do not make the mistake. So then you would ask me, well, how not to make that mistake? Well, obviously, you know what the mistake is. And if you know what the mistake is that leads to discontentment and leads to a sense of discouragement, then this is where the spiritual trajectory will work for you. Because, you know, Daddy Gulzar said once, it's very hard to make a mistake when you become a Brahmin. And I said, why? She says, because you're warned 3 times. She says, the first time the thought comes, I want to do this, you already know if you do it, where it's going to take you. Or the thought comes, if I speak to this one and they say something to me, this is how it will make me feel. You know, there's a knowing inside of us. So she says, you will be warned that if I do it this way, if I do it with this person, if I do it with, you know, whatever, it would make me feel this way. But if you hear that inner voice talking to you and you do it anyway, then you make a mistake. She said Baba would warn us 3 times. The second thing is that you would get the thought to do something, or you would even get a thought to think in a certain way, but then you know what Baba is telling you to do. You know what Baba is saying, this is right and this is not right. So do what he's telling you to do whenever that thought is arising. And then you won't make a mistake. And then she says the third one is sometimes Baba would remove you from the situation. So you don't have to be in that situation to make the mistake. But having removed you, you walk right back into that situation and make the same mistake. So she says there will be 3 signals that Baba will give you that would help you not to make the mistake. So if you ignore all 3 signals and you go ahead and make the mistake, then there will be discouragement. So try to listen to Baba's signals. At the moment the awareness comes that if I do this, it's going to lead me down the wrong road, stop it. Change your attitude to one of having good wishes and pure feelings for yourself, not to do that mistake. Thirdly, bring benefit to yourself. But thirdly, how do I see myself before I make the mistake? How am I seeing myself before I take that action to make the mistake? And if I'm seeing myself as a human being, to err is human, then I'm going to make the mistake. But if I see myself as how Baba sees me, an elevated soul, a child of God, then I won't make the mistake. So even these 3 steps in the spiritual trajectory, before you go to, you know, what kind of a culture will my mistake be creating in the Brahmin family? What kind of actions will lead me to what? And the consequences of that actions, and then what kind of world will it create inside of me? It would make me step down from my self-sovereignty. Before you even go to that, just stay with these 3: awareness, attitude, and vision of yourself. And that would help you not to make the mistake. It is not enough to say to change your thought from negative to positive, because just changing a thought, the mistake will continue to happen. But if you change your awareness, the awareness will change the thought. And so it's very important to always look at yourself with the awareness that Baba looks at you. And you want mistakes are things that there's a slippage in remembering who I am. It's only when I forget who I am, I make a mistake.
Thank you. Indeed, it's always back to the essence. Thank you, Gayatri Ben.
And what is the essence? You said it all comes back to the essence. What is that essence?
That I'm a soul.
Well,
Yeah.
not just you're a soul, but what quality of a soul are you? Everybody
Yes.
is a soul, but what's the quality? Who is telling you you're a soul? And what's the quality of the soul that Baba is showing to you that you are? That is very important.
That's right. Thank you.